the Sixth World, there are groups of criminals known as Shadowrunners who act as deniable assets for governments, megacorporations, or anyone who has the Nuyen. The stories of these agents for hire are known as the Fixer Files.
Hi chummers, and welcome to another Fixer File. I'm Rhydian, the GM and editor of the Prejudice podcast. This particular episode of the Fixer Files is a little bit different and is a little experiment I've had for an idea that's been kicking around for a while now. At their heart, actual play podcasts are about the story and world building. But not everyone gets on with the format, which is absolutely fine. So, I had a thought about writing some short stories to read aloud or do as radio plays myself. But with GMing and editing and trying to have some sort of life in between, sadly I just don't have the time. Then, my good friend and one of my home game players,
Runner name redacted,
came to me asking about doing something with their short stories, and I frankly bit the hand off. This is a first attempt at a Shadowrun radio play, and is aimed to invite in someone new to the Shadowrun world and establish some of its background by giving them a look at it through the eyes of Grim, the character of
Runner name redacted,
as he gets interviewed by the cops. I hope you enjoy listening, and a special thank you to
Runner name redacted
for providing the script, of which we might have more to come. If you have a story you'd like to get turned into a radio play or narrated for others to enjoy, I'd love to make it available to the Shadowrun community. Just drop me a message on Discord via the link in the show notes. Also, a special thank you to our additional voices who are credited at the end. With that out of the way, here's the story.
Interview commencing at 06:04 Eastern Time. 2 officers present, recording via AR and magnetic tape. Parties provided with live transcription. Subject is under truth spell. For the record, subject is a mage and may be capable of interfering with the spell.
State your name for the record.
My name is Sammael Lord.
Okay, Samuel Lord.
No, not Samuel, nor the more correct spelling of Sammael, with 1 M. Don't ask me why, my folks must have misread it or something. Hey, I was born near the start of the Sixth World. Drek was fragged. A little typo isn't going to define my life.
Sammael Lord, then.
Yeah, Sammael. Named after a biblical archangel. Or so I'm told. I don't know. It's all Oz to me. People cared both more and less about their religions back then. They got mighty uppity about their chosen mythos, yet few seemed really invested. Suppose you can afford to be lax when you don't have to worry about your chosen deity actually answering your prayers. Sometimes I wonder if there actually is an Archangel Sammael. That would be terrifying. He's supposed to be the precursor to the Grim Reaper, or something close to it. Not that that had anything to do with my chosen runner name or anything.
The runner? Would you mind clarifying for the record?
Ah yes, I've done some work as a Shadowrunner. A good one, if I do say so myself. Well, decent-ish. I did all right, okay? Get off my hoop.
Now, what exactly is your definition of a Shadowrunner?
You want me to define a Shadowrunner? Really? Have you been living in a dead zone for the last half-century? Fraggot, sorry. I forget how invisible we can be to the sinners out there. I mean, half the Drek we've been slotted with is practically out of myths and legends. So, Karl? Little stories about the mercs who steal away into the night, infiltrating corp-level security and tweaking the nose of dragons. Well, there's a ton of exaggeration, but not all of it is that far off. Yes, we exist, and not because we're the best of the best. There are times when Renraku Red Samurai, Lone Star Officers, or the dreaded HTR, High Threat Response, to those of you that haven't had a half dozen squads. Yes, half dozen squads, not squads of half a dozen, of heavily armed, augmented, and magically superior goons pour out of APCs like they're fragging clown cars, would be the better option. Or more powerful, at any rate. The reason runners exist is simple. We are deniable. Maybe Ares Macrotechnology wants to kidnap an Evo Corp biotechnician. Maybe a salaryman working for Shiawase has some frag-up that he wants dealt with quietly. Or maybe there's an asset in one of the many no-go zones that would be political or literal suicide for anyone with a suit to enter. In those cases, you want a team of semi-professionals with no official ties to you to go in and deal with the situation. And if it goes to Drek, well, what a shame. Hire another team if your funds stretch that far, or bite the bullet and tell your bosses. Maybe even blame the Drek hitting the fan on the rogue elements that you have no idea how they got there.
Okay, we get it. So, what about you? You're being light on the details.
Okay, I'll get back to me. Sorry, I don't often talk about myself. I'm kind of secretive. I was born in the mid-2010s, in a small town a couple of dozen miles outside of what was then Portland, Oregon. Yes, that Portland. Though I was long gone before my kindred took over. We'll come back to that.
I've never heard of Oregon.
You're a tier kid? From before it was the tier?
Yes. My parents are both human. They'd have to be. They were in their 20s when UGE hit.
Tell us about UGE.
Ugh. Really? UGE, chummer? Don't tell me I have to. Fine. Unexplained genetic expression. First time round, it was when we elves started coming out of the genetic woodwork. Those that weren't from the fourth world, that is.
What's the fourth world?
We're in the sixth world. The last one was the fifth world. Work it out.
Wait, how could an elf be around since fourth world then? Wouldn't that make them...
Ah, yes. They exist. But if you ever meet one, do not piss them off. They're at least 5,000 years old. Not me, though. I was born the normal way, just with ears a little pointier than you'd expect. UGE had been going on for a few years already, so I wasn't some bizarre new thing. But it was still early days. They still thought it was a genetic condition at the time, and all sorts of medical types wanted to poke and prod at me to see if they could find a cure. Fortunately, we weren't that rare, and my folks didn't care to let me be an experimental subject. Growing up an elf in a human world was tricky. Prejudice never goes away, even when everyone is liable to encounter at least a few elves or dwarves in their daily lives. We're not exactly rare, even if we're still a minority amongst the regular humans. Still, I went to school like a good little boy, not quite excelling at anything in particular, but generally being one of the smart kids. Then, in my early teens, I awakened.
Awakened? Tell us a little bit about that.
Come on, really? Everyone knows about magic. Yes, we are rare, but we tend to make an impact. Fine. Awakening is the term used for when a person finally gets in touch with their inner self, opens their third eye, finds their center of power.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, you're no fun. Okay. In simple terms, it's when someone discovers they can access mana, or in layman's terms, magic. I love my magic. I couldn't imagine living without it. Technically, I was trained as a combat mage, though that's rather a broad term. I know a few deadly spells, but combat magic isn't just throwing a fireball at the nearest ganger. It's about learning how to shape the battlefield, how to keep your cool whilst lead is flying in the air, what to do when you can't channel. Yes, I can hold my own even without my spells, though I'd not want to test myself against anyone with more than a sharpened stick. Maybe that's cowardly, but I'm no pugilist. I'm not built to trade blows with an angry troll. That's why we work in teams. I know a girl who can trade punches with an angry troll. I know a dwarf swordsman who can carve his way through half a gang without breaking a sweat. I know another girl who summons an army of spirits. I know someone who can disappear into the shadows, appear 50 feet behind you, and shoot your kidney into oblivion. I also know an elf who is more fragile even than me, yet can cut a man in two from 500 meters, all without magic. I love magic, but I know not to rely on it overmuch.
That'll do, chummer. We don't need a treatise.
Okay. Back to me. So when I hit puberty, along with the usual mysteries of hair in places I'd never had it before, and hormones raging, or should I say, surging, I had to deal with that sixth sense of knowing there was some sort of energy in the air that I couldn't quite explain. So, more than elves and dwarves, magic was new at the time. That bragging comet, oh my. People knew of magic as a concept, coloured with misinformation from fiction and myth. But few thought magic to be a real thing. If people sneered at me for being an elf in a human world, that disdain turned to bitterness and hatred when it came to magic. Frustratingly, some of their fear was justified. Unlike with UGE, awakening didn't just hit the very young. Nor did it have any kind of moral compass. Yes, heroes were born, firefighters suddenly able to summon water spirits, soldiers able to gird themselves with invisible armor, medics able to bring people back from the brink of death when first aid was exhausted. But so too were criminals, corrupt officials, zealots, and fools awakened. Balls of acid were hurled at heretics, police officers were hamstrung by invisible hands, protesting mobs were inclined to self-hatred to riot amongst themselves. Not that things have gotten any better. We just know more now. Anyway, high school sucked. People who shall remain nameless blamed me unfairly for their various misfortunes, and I was a target for their jibes and beatings. One day, someone took it too far, using experimental anti-magic tech to threaten my very soul, or my astral form, if you don't want to get too poetic. I survived, obviously, but my situation came to the attention of certain interested parties, magic users in its ranks. Through various subsidiaries, it began a campaign of recruiting potential resources from schools and academies throughout the country. That particular corp has long since disappeared into dust, The bare bones of what was left came to be owned by a group whose name everyone will know. Horizon.
Horizon Group. We know what you think.
Can the sarcasm. Even we don't know who's listening.
Yes. So, anyway, the so beneficent corp, whoever they were at the time, paid a handsome sum to my parents, a stipend, as it were. For that, they took over my legal guardianship and sent me to Europe to improve my education. First, I was ensconced in a boarding school, then entered into the University of Prague, working on my magical background doctorate. No, you don't have to call me doctor, especially not in my group. Sorry, inside joke. Prejudice still existed, of course, but universities tend to have a more inclusive, inviting officiere. I even made friends, though I haven't been in contact with them for a long, long time. The other thing I found at university was my particular tradition.
Tradition? You mean the gods that you pray to?
What? Prague, no. Traditions are just schools of magic, encompassing the style, methods of learning, and connections to magic. They're not compatible, unfortunately. You could say that each one is a different type of engine. They all have similar basic theories, but you can't run a hydrogen fuel cell on kerosene. At first, I thought I'd be a hermetic mage, one who sees magic as a branch of science, applying the laws of physics, Newtonian theories, and various other elemental principles to the emerging study of magic. For a while, that seemed to work for me, though I never could quite get the hang of it. One day, though, I read a book that had a slightly different approach. Yes, magic is quantifiable, but it's far more abstract than the practical sciences. The book expressed a theory that magic had more in common with mathematics than physics, comparing a spell formula with non-Euclidean geometry using imaginary numbers as if they were genuinely expressed functions. Suddenly, it all clicked. Sadly, I'm hamstrung by the fact that my tradition is incredibly niche. Finding fellow practitioners is difficult, to say the least, though there are certain facilities that do cater to the odder schools of thought. My rare tradition may explain a certain oddity of mine compared to most of my kind. Perhaps your typical hermetic mage would see mentor spirits as some strange abstraction that had no place in the science of magic. Logically, such spirits are manifestations of magic and thus can't possibly be in a position to further the study of their metaforms, or some dreck like that. Mathemagics, my particular subtradition, is more intuitive. You can't always apply logic to equations that express impossibilities as a matter of course. That jars with the pure mathematicians of the world, for whom logic is law. It's why I don't get on with those types. When the Raven, a spirit beyond those summonable by earthly mages, decided to first help, then immediately destroy my life's work, at first I thought I was destroyed. Something in me died, never to be reborn. Yet, something about the Raven called out to me. He or she, I can't tell, seemed to engender a sense of wonder in my heart, in my soul. Yes, the blasted creature had just erased 3 decades of work in a particularly crass way, but something within me answered a question unasked. And Raven had solved the equation that had taken almost 30 years to compile, and told me that I had been asking the wrong question. I had to know more.
You're a raven mage. I thought that was a shaman thing.
What does this raven have to do with anything?
You didn't read the file, did you?
I may have skimmed it.
Just shut up and listen.
Yes, so here I am, a non-shaman with a mentor spirit. Weird, huh?
What happened next? After university, I mean.
After university? What? Sorry, I was a million miles away. Well, rather than bypassing my life as a student, perhaps I should jump back a bit and mention something that happened whilst I was at boarding school. Not related to my education, but formative, nevertheless. I'd left my hometown, for good, or so I thought. It wasn't exactly an uncommon situation. Gifted children, those with magic or peculiar metatypes or early changelings, or even the otaku of later decades, were often purchased as assets by the megacorps. Still, I spoke with my biological parents regularly, although the frequency of our chats did fade over time. Not even extraterritoriality forced children like me to break all ties with their loved ones. And then Vitas 2 struck.
I did read about that one. Virally induced toxic allergy syndrome. Sounds tough.
Yes. A plague that killed 900 million metahumans was, as you say, tough. And a source of personal tragedy. I returned home in the summer of 2023, right at the tail end of lockdown. Quarantine hotel was cheap and nasty, just as I'd expected. Though I got to spend much of it with a pretty elf minder I would have, under other circumstances, had many inappropriate thoughts about. None of that mattered, though. As soon as I was released from that degrading bureaucratic nightmare of a dive motel, I made my way to Providence Hospital in Portland, where my father had been moved. Thanks to the payment for, well, me. My folks could afford the better care of the private facility. For what it was worth. My last memory of the man was seeing him through hermetically sealed glass, bedecked by tubes and wires, IVs and monitors, ticking away his final moments. I'd thought my mother was cold at the time, but I was just too distraught to follow up on her emotional state. I stayed for the funeral, of course. My father was a sociable man, the funeral attended by many friends from his various careers over his too short life. I noticed none of them spoke to no one. I'd never felt emptier in my life. A few days later, through my minder, I'd reached out to my mother, hoping to offer and receive some comfort. I was rebuffed, which I put down to grief. Rightly, though not entirely correct. Eventually, my minder convinced me to return to boarding school. The corp who would be bought by Horizon were generous and empathetic, and probably would have funded any bad habit I decided to surrender myself to, were I of that personality. And yes, despite my age, I overindulged in booze and psychoactive compounds. I mean, who wouldn't? But I'm not a man elf of vice. Well, not much. Not then. I threw myself back into my studies. It took an embarrassingly long time for me to realise that my messages to my mother had stopped going through. At first, I didn't understand. I thought it was a technical issue, fragging networks failing to connect us, or some disruption from a petty war. I ended up reaching out via my corporate sponsor. I remember that conversation like it was yesterday. Mum, it's Sam. Are you okay? I've been trying to get in touch with you for ages.
Sammael, what do you want?
I'd been surprised by this reception. All the conversations I'd rehearsed in my head falling by the wayside. Well, after Dad...
Don't you dare speak his name, you little shit.
The cold fury in her voice had taken me aback. I reacted... poorly. What the frag, Mum? I was there when he passed. I was at the funeral. I tried to reach out to you, but just got the cold shoulder.
What'd you expect, Pixie? Yeah, you were there. At the end. Not in the weeks before. Not when he was moved from that Bulldrek community hospital, when crappy doctors with half a degree between them kept poking and prodding at your father until he had more holes than skin. But do you know why? Because of you. Something about father and a fraggin' elf prolonged his suffering.
What? Is that what the doctor said?
Like they'd tell me a slotting thing. No, I just know it. Besides, I met some people who really know what's going on. And they confirmed it for me.
What? Who? Mum, what's happening to you?
Leave me alone, Sam. And don't contact me again.
The line died. Shortly afterwards, I discovered that my mother had sold our family home and disappeared off the grid. I never saw her again.
Well, shit.
That's... wow.
Well, that was grim. Now you know why I took that as my runner name. So, later life, let's see. Well, I got my doctorate, did a thesis on magical phenomena. It impressed, actually. Soon enough, my corporate sponsors deployed me to Denver, inducting me into the heady discipline of thaumaturgical crime scene investigation, an emerging field that studied the various horrific effects of magical carnage. Still, they were smart enough to direct my education. They didn't want a one-man army of both combat mage and occult investigator. So, my role was that of support. Fire and theory. I was often paired with someone at the opposite end of the magical spectrum, a manipulator and a censor. I picked up a few tricks, learned what became my favourite spell, Physical Wall. That did not please my handler. No longer the pretty elf from my childhood, but a sour-faced orc who was perfectly willing to demonstrate his superior physical strength. Since it was unsanctioned, but you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Instead, I got to learn how to use the spell in new and unusual ways. A personal favourite is putting a wall starting at just over a metre in the air, right in front of a motorcyclist. Take the rider out without needing to stop the bike itself. Highly amusing. I made friends, and I made enemies. In 2061, when Horizon Group was formed, it brought the ashes of several previous corps. I got a new boss, an elf, as if that mattered. A more objectionable sort I have never found. Bigoted, holier than thou, filled with elven superiority. He rubbed me the wrong way, and the same was true in reverse. He hated my tolerance. He wouldn't deign to call it friendship with the lesser species. So when the chance came to throw me under the bus, he did just that. After my forcible exit from Horizon, I found myself without a SIN, without contacts, without resources. I ended up working in a runner bar, briefly. Long story short, someone helped me out at a bad time, introduced me to a low-level fixer, who then paired me up with a team needing magical support. And so, I entered the shadows. Of course, our chosen profession is a dangerous one. After Crash 2.0, as part of which my SIN was lost to the ether, our tactics became outdated. We needed bleeding-edge tech, but couldn't afford it. One of the emerged. Yes, technomancers exist, and they are fragging scary. Nearly wiped out my team. The survivors faced a heat wave, cleaners coming in to give us lead injections. I had to get out. I chose to return to a place a few dozen miles from the place of my birth. Tir Tarangir.
Tir Tarangiri, the so-called Land of Promise. Out of our jurisdiction, and the less we know about it, the better. Skip to when you went back to Denver, please.
Huh. Yes. Met a fixer. No, I'm not telling you their name. They introduced me to a new team. And, well, everything changed.
Yeah, we have files on your team. The sea cucumbers, really?
It was a safe word we used on a mission, and it just kind of stuck.
I've heard worse, I reckon.
Like the black cats.
Who?
Inside joke. We threw them under the bus. Repeatedly. They deserved it.
Fine, whatever. You lot are really paranoid. There's dreck all about your team's exploits in Denver beyond hints and vague threats.
That's what tends to happen when you piss off a great dragon.
He's just fragging with us.
I wish. You want the story? Go find a dragon and ask them. I'm not telling you Jack. I'm not making more trouble for Denver than we already have. There are lines, oh my. You know the Runner's Creed? Rule 1?
Never make a deal with a dragon. I know it.
We didn't make a deal. We were given a suggestion. Leave Denver with a clean slate.
I see.
So we followed a lead on an old enemy all the way to the Rotten Apple. By the time we caught up with her, we'd established ourselves a bit in Manhattan, chose to start our new lives and new careers on the other side of the continent. Still, I'm not convinced it's far enough, but we are doing all right.
There's a certain bridge in Brooklyn that would disagree with that.
I don't know what you mean, Chummer. We were nowhere near the bridge when it came down.
Bull dread. Well, let's gloss over that for now. Tell us how you established yourselves in New York City.
In Denver, we had all lived together in an old condo we named the Uncanny Valley. In New York, we settled in our own places across Manhattan Island, some in better areas than others.
So you live alone?
I live with my wife. She's got a soft spot for cops. Tried to join them a few times, but can't do entrance exams. I think they make her nervous. So I decided to go legit for her, and we formed the Ibex Corvid Detective Agency. We're both licensed private investigators.
And I'm sure your license will hold up under scrutiny, huh?
Try me.
I'll level with you, Grim. I don't believe you're legit for even a second. We've seen you and your cronies Yes, even your wife, Dixie, love that name by the way, come and go from places no law-abiding citizen would frequent. A certain Giuseppe's comes to mind.
Nothing suspicious about that. We did him a favour once. He asked our agency to track someone down. We did. Saved that poor hoop's life.
Yes, the Romanian. That's where you met one orc who goes by Maverick.
There was an orc Giuseppe asked us to bring along, yes.
Now, was it through Maverick that you encountered the other members of his team? Huggies, Sunshine, Slipstream, and Toiger?
I can't answer that. Not my story to tell.
Even an old man like you knows there's no longer such a thing as the Fifth Amendment.
Even so.
You know, dodging these questions isn't going to look good for you. It's not going to look good on the report.
I think we're done here. I'm a legitimate PI. You can't pin anything on me that isn't already wiped clean. Either charge me with something, or let me go.
We can hold you indefinitely.
You can try.
Is that a threat?
I'm not the one you should worry about. Don't you think I keep in touch with the people with whom I survived a great dragon?
Interview terminated. Get the frag out.
Hi folks, and thank you for listening to this small experiment in doing a Shadowrun radio play. As I mentioned before, if you would like to hear more of this sort of content, please let me know, and I will see about making more, as well as potentially making a separate pod feed for it, if enough people enjoy it. A special thank you in order of appearance to AdamB of the PayData podcast, DrFriendship of the SINless podcast, and Sid of the Resting Glitchface podcast for lending both their time and voices to this. See you again soon, chummers. The intro and outro music is Sentimental by Karl Cassey of White Bat Audio, and the background music is Interrogation Room by tabletopaudio.com. The Tops Company Inc. has the sole ownership of the names, logo, artworks, marks, photographs, audio, video, and/or any other proprietary material used in connection with the game Shadowrun. The Tops Company Inc. has granted permission to this work to use such names, logos, artwork, marks, and/or any other proprietary material for promotional and informational purposes on its website, but does not endorse and is not affiliated with this work in any official capacity whatsoever. All other works mentioned in this work remain the property of their respective owners. This work is affiliated with the Pride Against Prejudice podcast and is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license. So if you want to use any part of the show, please do give us the credit. Take care, folks.